Hello guys and welcome back. Today I will finally cover the BT tanks in proper. Let's not waste any time and let's take a more detailed look at our protagonist. The tank weighed about 10.2 metric tons, with a crew of 3, a driver, a loader that would also operate the machine gun, and a commander that would also work the main gun. The vehicle featured Christie's suspension, with a 4-road wheel no-return roller setup. The wheels were very big to work the track on their own. These were mounted on individual spring-loaded arms, with each having some 287mm of vertical traverse, which was very good for the time. The 250mm wide track was on par with contemporary designs. Plus, the tank had a ground clearance of 350mm. All these things combined made the tank very good in the department of off-road travel. The tank was propelled by a 400 horsepower Liberty L12 gasoline engine, which would be redesignated to M5 by the Soviets, and supplied the tank with a power-to-weight ratio of 39 horsepower per ton. Combined with the other aspects of the vehicle, this made the tank fast, really fast, with a top speed on trials of 52 km per hour. This speed gave the tank the ability to make a rather interesting mark in history, being credited with the longest jump ever made by a tank. And so one must say, if man was supposed to fly, God would have given him tracks. Besides the tank's amazing speed, as mentioned in the previous video on Christie's original tank, the tank had the ability to drive without tracks. So just the road wheels, where the frontmost pair was used for steering. This was accomplished with using a steering wheel, which could be easily mounted by the driver. Protection hadn't been increased and remained at a max of 12.7mm of thickness, with a sort of pike nose hull form leaving at least some chance for bounces. And lastly we come to the armament. This had to be completely changed because the turrets weren't part of the original purchase, and thus had to be built from the ground up, which was really the only thing different to the M1931. The Soviets decided to go with a cylindrical turret fitted with a 37mm B3 gun. Additionally, a 7.62mm DT machine gun was mounted in a 45 degrees arc to the right. Due to a gun shortage, some were fitted with different armaments, as seen on the table on screen. The vehicles fitted with an additional 2 DT machine guns will also lose one of their crew members. Now, with the new turret attached, the tank was finally complete and would be named Bystrochny Tank, or Fast Tank in English. Short, that would be BT-2, because BT-1 was already taken up by an earlier failed Soviet prototype of the late 1920s. So, the Soviets had bought some tanks. Now, what was their purpose? This was a little bit difficult, as the Soviets were still in the process of developing their military doctrine. Up until now, there were two trains of thought in competition with one another. On the one hand, there was the thought of the fatigue strategy that advocated for a defensive style doctrine in which no decisive military actions would be taken, but rather small-scale offensives to keep an opponent restrained and force them to abandon offensive actions and lead into a stalemate. So essentially a strategy of attrition to slowly bleed out an opponent and render them incapable of acting. And on the other hand, the advocates of the doctrine of annihilation, in which the army should only counter potential initial offensives and as soon as humanly possible go on the offensive on their own. In which combined arms, so to speak, infantry, artillery, armor and air power, should work together to overwhelmingly defeat the enemy in a vast area. Tanks and aircraft should be used to break through the enemy lines and cause havoc in the rear, preventing the regrouping of the enemy. Eventually, the advocates of the latter came out on top. This train of thought developed into the deep battle doctrine, which I hopefully will cover in a future video. But before that could happen, the BT was already in Soviet service. So a fast tin can with a gun attached to it without a deeper purpose. But luckily for the BT's sake, the vehicle was finding its place in the developing doctrine. First as a reconnaissance vehicle, because of their light armor, and only after a second look at them as tanks, in these spearheads which should interrupt supply and reorganization efforts of the enemy. Like with almost every tank or armored fighting vehicle in history, there were a load of upgrades made on the basis of this tank. Let's go touch on the main ones a bit, shall we? First off, on the BT-3. Here they changed the measurements from imperial to metric, the commies being not completely crazy after all, resulting in a microscopical change to the armor. On the BT-4 they replaced the riveted construction with wells. Up next, the first serious upgrade was the BT-5, introducing a new turret with a 45mm 20K gun, which offered slightly better penetration, and this time a coaxial DT machine gun. The turret looked very similar to the previous one, but was elongated towards the back. The new vehicle weighed about 11.5 metric tons, and about 1,884 were made, compared to the 620 of the BT-2s. The next big design step was the BT-7. Here the Soviets slightly readjusted the hull, making it 300mm longer, 200mm higher, giving it 50mm more ground clearance, and generally slightly changed the shape and up-armored the thing to around 15 to 22mm frontal and 15mm on the side. This brought the weight up to 13.8 metric tons. Also they added a new engine, which produced 400 to 500 horsepower, sources differ, to compensate for the increased weight, and an additional machine gun, which was mounted in the rear of the turret bustle to deal with infantry sneaking up on the tank from the rear. And finally, they improved the system in which the tank could be used without tracks, so only a new gear hub had to be placed on the rearmost road wheel instead of a complicated chain system. Of this model, 4,613 would be made. Now, what is the BT-6, I hear you ask? Well, while the BT-7 was a successful redesign of the BT-5, the BT-6 was simply a failed attempt to redesign the BT-4, and I could find barely any information about it, only that some redesigning and reshaping of the vehicle was done, and one picture. So that said, let's go to a few subvariants of the BT-7. Here we have the BT-7A, or the BT-7 artillery version, which featured a new turret housing a 76.2mm KT-28 gun. The coaxial machine gun was put in a ball mount, with the additional machine gun in the turret rear being retained. The vehicle was created for infantry support, and one would be later upgunned with a 76.2mm F-32 gun, the same gun from the T-34, making it more suitable for tank-on-tank combat, and was mainly done to test the gun in more detail. The vehicle would weigh about 14 tons, and about 154 were made. The last notable subvariant of the BT-7 was the BT-7M, sometimes also referred to as BT-8. This was actually in BT-7 with a W2 500 horsepower diesel engine, so the vehicle could go 62 km per hour, with 788 being made. Finally, here's a list of all the prototypes and less successful or numerous subvariants based on the BT tanks. I will mention only a few here briefly, otherwise we will be here all day. First off, the D-38, an artillery support variant based on the BT-2. The first proposal looked similar to the French Char B1, but was rejected due to insufficient space for a second gun in the hull. The next proposal only changed the turret, and swapped the gun for a 76.2mm PS3 gun. Only one prototype was built and ultimately rejected. The idea would come back not only on the BT-7A, but also on the basis of the BT-5 in the form of the BT-5A. Then the BT-2 and BT-5IS, a variant to improve trackless off-road capabilities, generally in success, but nothing major came of it, except a name that would return a few years down the line. Next, the KBT-5 and 7. These were command vehicles with fixed turrets and better radio equipment. Then the KHBT, 2, 5 and 7, all featuring an KS-34 flamethrower, the PT-1, an attempt to make an amphibious tank on the basis of the BT-2, and lastly the RBT-5, which was a BT-5 that had two 425mm, 250 kg tank torpedoes on Katusha rails attached to its turret, for the purposes of bunker busting.
Holy Jesus! What is that? What the fuck is that?
That should be all. I think I got all. I could have possibly have forgotten one. I think I got it all. I think I actually have gotten all. Finally, let's talk about their combat records, as well as my final thoughts on them. So, the BT-2 only saw limited service in Poland and the Winter War of 1939 and 40, as well as Operation Barbarossa. But his successors were more extensively used, and because of their performance being quite similar overall, I will group them all together. But first, some general things about their user-friendliness. The tank had a reputation of being unreliable, mainly due to complex engineering of the suspension and low number of spare parts. The first one being more a failure of Christie than the Soviets, but the last one, anyway. The other big problem was that there was often no internal comm, or even tank-on-tank radio. This meant the commander gave directions to the driver via kicking him in the shoulder, on the side in which direction he wanted to go to. And external communication had to be carried out via flags, which is less than ideal in a combat situation. Though it has to be mentioned that not only the Soviets were suffering from this issue.
Sacre bleu!
The tanks were first used in the Spanish Civil War, where 50 BT-5s sent, but due to bad tactical usage, several were lost. Next, the BT-7 took part in the Battle of Kangin Gol. Here the tanks proved quite good in tank-on-tank warfare, but numerous fell victim to Japanese tank killer teams, so the final assessment wasn't stellar from the Soviets' perspective. And lastly, before we come to the big shit show, it was used in Finland during the Winter War of 1939-40. Here, bad terrain, freezing temperatures and ferocious Finnish resistance denied the Soviets and the BTs an easy victory. Again, Finnish ambushes, utilizing skis, proved very dangerous. This and the Japanese incidents were the main reason for the installation of the rear turret machine gun. Additionally, Finnish AT guns and rifles were able to take many of them out due to their light armor. So, and now on to Barbarossa and World War II in general. The first issue here is simple. The BT was supposed to exploit breakthroughs, so as soon as possible they would need to
Gotta go fast.
Yet, now the Germans came rolling over the horizon and went,
Okay, here we go. Focus. Speed. I am speed. Stay focused. Speed. I'm faster than fast, quicker than quick. I am lightning.
and rolled over unprepared Soviet positions like it was going out of fashion. The Red Army fought back, and quite ferociously, but this came at a cost, and especially the BTs would feel that, with around 2,000 being lost in the year of 1941 alone. They would see continuous usage on the Eastern Front, with no outstanding success up until 1943, by when they were utterly outclassed, and saw final service in Operation August Storm, the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. And while they performed well, this is maybe just a bit unfair to the Japanese, who were busy.
Your game is through, 'cause now you have to answer
Hey, Bat Dad. I didn't hear no bell.
My conclusion. From this recap you could assume the tank was bad, very bad. But really, no. The tank was pretty well designed. The no-track travel function was maybe a bit unnecessary and weird, but the suspension and speed was superb. The gun and crew ergonomics were okay, and the armor was not as bad as it was made out to be. It was on par with vehicles of the time, at least for the most part, and for the use it was designed for, it was enough. The losses in Spain and Manchuria can be explained by bad use of them, and really all the Soviet tanks deployed to Finland didn't really perform well. And the high losses against the Germans really were to be expected when you put your light fast breakthrough tank in the defense against an opponent with more effective crew ergonomics, air superiority, good close air support, radio for better communication, experienced tank crews and good generals with armor know-how. Plus, having even their bad AT guns like the Pak-36 being able to punch through their armor doesn't hurt either. Though it cannot be held up against a vehicle that it performs badly in a role it was never designed to serve in. The biggest problem with this tank was mostly a problem of their country. A country with a lack of radios, good gun sights, spare parts, skilled generals after Stalin's purges, and preparations for an invasion of this scale, or an ability to choose their fights. Ultimately, I kinda feel bad for the poor BT. The right tank for the right war, in the wrong place at the wrong time.